The phone hit the marble floor and shattered into 100 pieces. "That's what happens when help forgets their place," Vanessa said, stepping over the broken glass in her heels. Rosa Delgado stared at the shattered screen, tears streaming down her face, because on that phone was the last voicemail from her mother, who had passed away 3 months ago, and the only photo of her son before he was taken from her. What Vanessa didn't know was that phone call, coming in at that exact moment, would expose a secret that would destroy everything she had built, and change Rosa's life forever. Welcome back, friends, to another story that will touch your heart. Today's story is about pride, injustice, and the kind of redemption that only happens when the truth finally comes to light. It's filled with heartbreak, hope, and a twist you won't see coming. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? A shattered phone was only the beginning of Rosa's nightmare. The Whitfield mansion sat on 11 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut, its white marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. Rosa Delgado had worked there for 6 years, ever since she'd fled a broken marriage in Hartford with nothing but a duffel bag and her 4-year-old son Mateo in tow. She wasn't just a maid. To Daniel Whitfield's late mother, Eleanor, Rosa had been family. Eleanor used to say Rosa had hands that worked hard and a heart that worked harder. When Eleanor died 2 years ago, it was Rosa who sat by her bedside every night, holding her hand, long after the paid nurses had gone home. But Eleanor was gone now. And so was the warmth she'd brought to that house. In her place stood Vanessa Cole, Daniel's fiancée. Blonde, polished, magazine cover beautiful, with a laugh that could charm a room and a stare that could freeze one. Vanessa hadn't always been this way. People who knew her back in Ohio before she moved to New York and got swallowed by its glittering circles remembered a different girl, one who tutored kids for free, who cried at sad movies, who once gave her coat to a homeless man outside a diner in December. That girl was buried now, underneath 5 years of galas, influencer friends, and a mother-in-law-to-be, Camille, who whispered constantly in her ear, "Darling, you don't owe the help kindness. You owe them boundaries." Rosa had learned to stay small around Vanessa. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, her opinions to herself. It wasn't submission, it was survival. She needed this job. Mateo, now 10, lived with Rosa's sister in Bridgeport, and Rosa sent every spare dollar toward his school fees, praying that one day she'd save enough to bring him home for good. That morning had started like any other. Rosa arrived at 6, before the sun had fully risen, humming softly as she polished the banister. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, a text from her sister. "Mateo has a fever. Nothing serious, don't worry." Rosa's stomach twisted anyway. A mother's worry doesn't wait for permission. She was still thinking about Mateo when Vanessa swept into the foyer, dressed for a charity luncheon in a royal blue gown, diamonds catching the light. "Rosa," she snapped, not even looking up from her own phone, "the Bentley isn't polished. I have a lunch with the Ashworth Foundation in 40 minutes, and I will not be photographed getting into a dirty car." "I'll do it right now, Miss Cole," Rosa said, already moving toward the garage. "You should have done it an hour ago." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "This is exactly why people like you need supervision." Rosa said nothing. She had learned that silence cost less than defending herself. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She followed Rosa toward the garage, heels clicking against marble like a countdown. "Do you know what it's like," she said almost to herself, "to build an image, a reputation, a life, and have it threatened by carelessness? Well, you wouldn't understand. People like you don't have anything to protect." The words landed like a slap. Rosa's hands trembled as she reached for the polishing cloth, and in that moment, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it instinctively, an old habit from years of single motherhood, always half-braced for bad news. It was enough. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Were you just checking your phone on my time?" "My son is sick," Rosa said quietly. "I'm sorry. I don't care." Vanessa snatched the phone from Rosa's hand before she could react. "This is exactly the disrespect I'm talking about." "Please," Rosa said, her voice cracking. "That phone has—" She never finished the sentence. Vanessa, in a flash of fury she would later struggle to explain even to herself, hurled the phone onto the marble floor. It shattered instantly, screen splintering into a spiderweb of cracks, pieces skittering across the polished stone. Rosa dropped to her knees, scrambling for the broken device with shaking hands, tears spilling before she could stop them. On that phone was the last voicemail her mother had ever left her, 3 weeks before the stroke that took her. On that phone were 4 years of photos of Matteo, memories Rosa had never backed up anywhere else because she never had the money for extra storage, and never thought she needed to protect memories from someone she worked for. "It's just a phone," Vanessa said, though something in her voice wavered, some old, buried part of her flinching at the sight of Rosa's tears. She almost reached down to help. But Camille's voice echoed in her memory. "Never apologize to staff. It invites disrespect." So instead, Vanessa turned and walked away, her blue gown trailing over broken glass, leaving Rosa alone on the cold marble floor. She didn't see Daniel standing at the top of the staircase, having witnessed the entire thing. And she had no idea that in exactly 11 minutes, a phone call would come into that mansion, one that would unravel every carefully constructed lie Vanessa Cole had ever told. Daniel Whitfield had seen enough. But he wasn't ready to say so, not yet. Daniel stood frozen at the top of the staircase, his jaw tight, watching Rosa gather the shattered pieces of her phone with trembling hands. He had grown up in this house. He remembered Rosa teaching him to make his grandmother's tamales in the kitchen when he was 12, remembered her sitting with him through chemotherapy scares that turned out, thankfully, to be nothing, back when his own mother was too overwhelmed with grief over his father's death to comfort him herself. Rosa Delgado wasn't the help to Daniel. She was one of the few constants in a childhood defined by absent parents and empty rooms. He came down the stairs slowly, his footsteps echoing. Rosa looked up at him, quickly wiping her face with the back of her hand, straightening her apron as if composure could erase what had just happened. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm sorry, I'll clean this up right." "Rosa, stop." Daniel knelt down beside her, ignoring the $2,000 suit he was wearing, and began picking up pieces of glass himself. "I saw what happened." Rosa's eyes widened in alarm. "Please, sir, it's not necessary. I don't want any trouble." "You're not the one in trouble." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Is your son okay? I heard you say he was sick." Rosa nodded, tears threatening again, this time from unexpected kindness rather than cruelty. "A fever. My sister says it's nothing serious, but I can't reach her now, I can't." She gestured helplessly at the shattered device. "Use my phone," Daniel said immediately, pulling it from his pocket. "Call her right now." Rosa's hands shook as she dialed. Her sister picked up on the second ring, and relief flooded through her when she heard that Matteo's fever had already started to break, that he was resting, that everything would be fine. When she hung up, she handed the phone back to Daniel, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. "Truly." "Rosa." Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "How long has this been happening? Vanessa, has she done this before?" Rosa's face shuddered instantly, old instincts kicking in. "It was an accident, sir." Miss Cole was under stress. "It's really—" "Rosa." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to protect her. Not from me." She looked at him for a long moment, weighing years of caution against the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, quietly, she said, "It's not the first time she's raised her voice. But this is the first time she's ever broken something of mine." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing more, but something in his expression had changed, a decision forming behind his eyes. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa sat in the back of the newly polished Bentley, staring out the window, unusually quiet. The image of Rosa on her knees, gathering broken glass, kept replaying in her mind despite her best efforts to push it away. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself Rosa would replace the phone easily, that people like her exaggerated hardship for sympathy, that this was simply how the world worked. But another voice, an old voice, one that sounded like the girl she used to be, the one who cried at sad movies and gave her coat away in December, whispered otherwise. You saw her face. You know that phone meant something to her. And you didn't even ask why. Vanessa shook her head, as if she could physically dislodge the thought, and reached for her own phone to distract herself with messages from her wedding planner. 6 weeks until the wedding of the year. A $2 million celebration that would be featured in 3 major magazines. She had spent so long building this life, this image, this version of herself that belonged among America's wealthiest families. She couldn't afford guilt. Guilt was for people who could afford to lose something. Back at the mansion, Daniel helped Rosa to her feet. Take the rest of the day off, he said. Paid. Go check on your son. Sir, I couldn't possibly. That wasn't a request. A small warm smile broke through his seriousness. Family looks after family, Rosa. And you've been more of that to me than most people who share my blood. Rosa's eyes filled again, but this time with something closer to hope. As she gathered her things to leave, Daniel's own phone rang. He glanced at the screen, an unknown Manhattan number, and something told him to answer it. Hello. The voice on the other end was hesitant, careful. Is this Daniel Whitfield? My name is Patricia Kane. I'm calling about your fiancée, Vanessa Cole. I think there's something you need to know before your wedding. Something about who she really is and where she came from. Daniel's chest tightened. I'm listening. Not over the phone, Patricia said. Can we meet? It's about her past in Ohio. About a family she left behind. And a promise she broke. Daniel glanced toward the door where Vanessa's car had disappeared minutes ago. His mind spinning with questions he never thought he'd need to ask. What exactly had Vanessa Cole left behind in Ohio? And why was someone reaching out now, 6 weeks before the wedding, with a warning that sounded less like gossip, and more like a confession waiting to happen? The truth Vanessa had buried for 5 years was about to claw its way to the surface. Patricia Kane turned out to be a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a folder of documents clutched to her chest when she met Daniel 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop in Manhattan. She introduced herself as a social worker from Dayton, Ohio, and what she told Daniel over the next hour unraveled everything he thought he knew about the woman he was about to marry. Vanessa Cole hadn't always been Vanessa Cole. She had been born Vanessa Kowalski, raised in a modest 2-bedroom house in Dayton by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility. At 19, pregnant and terrified, Vanessa had given birth to a daughter, a little girl named Grace. 6 months later, overwhelmed, ashamed, and desperate for a life she believed she could never build in Dayton, Vanessa left. She legally changed her last name, moved to New York, and reinvented herself entirely, leaving Grace in the care of her own mother, who passed away 3 years later from a sudden heart attack. Grace had bounced through foster care ever since. Patricia had been her caseworker for the past 2 years. She's 8 years old, Patricia said, sliding a photograph across the table. A little girl with Vanessa's exact same eyes stared back at Daniel, gap-toothed and smiling in front of a modest foster home. She asks about her mother sometimes. We finally tracked Vanessa down through public records last month, after her engagement made local news back in Dayton. Someone recognized her photo. I've tried calling her 3 times. She hung up on me every time. Daniel sat in stunned silence, the coffee in front of him growing cold. The woman he had proposed to on a rooftop in Manhattan, the woman planning a $2 million wedding, the woman who had just weeks ago called Rosa Delgado disposable and beneath her. That woman had a daughter she'd abandoned and was actively avoiding. Why are you telling me this? Daniel finally asked, though he already suspected the answer. Because Grace deserves better than being erased, Patricia said simply. And because I think you deserve to know who you're marrying, not the woman in magazines but the whole truth. Daniel left that meeting with his world rearranged. He thought of Vanessa screaming at Rosa over a polished car and a spilled sense of entitlement, of the coldness she'd shown that morning without a flicker of remorse, of Camille's constant whispers about boundaries with the help. And now this. A daughter, abandoned, forgotten, living in foster care while Vanessa selected flower arrangements that cost more than most families' annual income. He didn't confront her immediately. He needed to understand. Was this a woman who had made one desperate, broken choice at 19 and buried it in shame? Or was this simply who she truly was, underneath all the polish? That evening, Daniel sat across from Vanessa at dinner, watching her closely as she complained about a catering mishap, completely unaware that Daniel now knew her deepest secret. He decided to test something. I saw Rosa today, he said carefully. She's still shaken up about her phone. Did you know it had her late mother's voicemail on it? Photos of her son she can never get back. Vanessa's fork paused midair. For just a moment, barely a flicker, something crossed her face. Not quite guilt. Something closer to recognition, like she was seeing her own reflection in a mirror she'd spent years avoiding. It's unfortunate, she said finally, recovering her composure. But she should back up her data properly. That's basic responsibility. Basic responsibility, Daniel repeated slowly. Like a mother should have, you mean? Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly sharp with alarm. What did you just say? Daniel held her gaze steadily. I got a call, Vanessa. From a woman named Patricia Kane. In Dayton, Ohio. The color drained from Vanessa's face so completely that for a moment, Daniel thought she might faint. Her hand trembled around her wine glass. Daniel, I can explain. Then explain, he said quietly. Tell me about Grace. The name hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Tears sprang instantly to her eyes. Real tears, the first genuine emotion Daniel had seen from her in months. I was 19, she whispered, her voice cracking apart. I was alone, I was terrified, my mother said she'd help and then she died and I couldn't. I told myself I'd go back for her once I had money, once I had stability, once I built something. And then years passed and I was ashamed and it got harder to face and I just buried it. I buried her. She's 8 years old, Vanessa. She's in foster care. She asks about you. Vanessa broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, the perfectly composed socialite dissolving into the frightened, guilt-ridden woman she'd been running from for nearly a decade. And in that unraveling, Daniel saw something he hadn't seen since they'd met. The girl underneath the armor, the one Camille and the elite circles had slowly suffocated over the years. What would you do, Daniel asked quietly, if you were in her place? 19, alone, terrified, and the whole world telling you that the only way forward was to leave everything, and everyone behind. He didn't have an answer for her. But he knew one thing with sudden, painful clarity. The wedding could not move forward as planned. Not until Vanessa faced what, and who, she had abandoned. Vanessa had 2 choices, and only one of them could save her. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in the guest bedroom, Grace's photograph propped against the lamp on the nightstand, staring at the daughter she'd spent 9 years trying to forget. Every carefully built wall inside her had cracked open, and behind it wasn't the confident, untouchable woman she presented to the world. It was a frightened 19-year-old who had made an unforgivable choice and never found the courage to undo it. She thought about Rosa, kneeling on the marble floor, gathering broken pieces of a phone that held irreplaceable memories of the people she loved. Vanessa understood now, with sickening clarity, why that moment had shaken something loose in her. She hadn't just been cruel to an employee. She had been staring without realizing it at a mirror, a woman who loved her family fiercely, who worked herself to exhaustion to protect her son, doing everything Vanessa herself had failed to do for Grace. The difference between them wasn't wealth or status. It was that Rosa had stayed. At 6 in the morning, Vanessa found herself standing outside Rosa's small apartment in Bridgeport, having driven there alone, without her driver, without her diamonds, wearing jeans and a plain sweater for the first time in years. Rosa opened the door cautiously, stunned to see Vanessa Cole standing on her doorstep. "Ms. Cole, is everything?" "I owe you an apology," Vanessa said, her voice raw. "Not the kind I say to protect my image. A real one." She held out a small box. Inside was a brand new phone already set up, along with a flash drive. "I paid a data recovery specialist overnight. He managed to pull almost everything from your old phone before it was too damaged. Your mother's voicemail, the photos of your son. I know it's not enough, but I wanted you to have them back." Rosa's hands trembled as she took the box, tears immediately welling in her eyes. "I don't understand. Why would you?" "Because I was cruel to you for things that had nothing to do with you," Vanessa said. "I was projecting years of my own guilt and shame onto anyone who reminded me that some people know how to love their children the right way. You deserve better than what I've given you." "I'm sorry, Rosa. Truly. It wasn't an instant fix. Trust, once broken, takes far longer to rebuild than it takes to shatter." But Rosa saw something genuine in Vanessa's eyes that hadn't been there before: humility. Over the following weeks, Vanessa did something no one in her elite social circle expected. She quietly hired a lawyer specializing in family reunification and began the long, difficult legal process of reconnecting with Grace, not to erase her mistakes, but to finally face them. She flew to Dayton alone, without publicists or photographers, and sat across from an 8-year-old girl with her own eyes, who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. "Are you really my mom?" Grace asked quietly. Vanessa's voice shook as she answered, "Yes. And I'm so sorry it took me this long to come find you. I was scared, and I made a terrible choice. And there's no excuse good enough for the years we lost. But if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Camille, predictably, was furious when she learned the truth. "You're going to throw away everything we've built, the image, the wedding, the family name, over some mistake from your past?" she snapped during a tense confrontation at the mansion. For the first time, Vanessa didn't shrink from Camille's disapproval. "That mistake, as you call her, is my daughter. And if being part of this family means burying who I really am and abandoning the people who need me, then maybe I don't want this family after all." Daniel, watching from the doorway, felt something in his chest loosen: pride, relief, and a flicker of the love he'd feared he'd lost entirely just weeks before. But the road to redemption wasn't without consequence. News of Vanessa's past leaked to a tabloid, and for a brutal week, she was dragged through headlines calling her a deadbeat socialite and worse. Wedding sponsors pulled out. Society friends stopped returning her calls. The glittering world she'd spent 9 years building began to crumble around her, piece by piece, much like Rosa's phone had shattered on that marble floor. And through it all, it was Rosa, the woman she had once treated as beneath her, who showed up at her door with a pot of homemade soup and quiet, steady kindness. "Everybody deserves a second chance to become who they were always meant to be," Rosa told her simply. "I forgave you already. Now you just have to forgive yourself." The wedding of the year almost didn't happen, but what took its place was something far more meaningful. 6 weeks later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, the guests who arrived at the Whitfield estate found something drastically different from what they'd expected. There was no $2 million production, no magazine photographers, no 500-person guest list. Instead, under a modest white arbor in the garden, no more than 60 people gathered: family, true friends, and the household staff who had cared for the Whitfields for years, seated not in the back but in the front rows of honor. Rosa sat beside her son Matteo, fully recovered from his fever, wearing his best shirt and grinning from ear to ear. Beside them sat a bright-eyed 8-year-old girl in a pale yellow dress, swinging her legs nervously, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. Grace, who had flown in from Dayton 3 days earlier and would be moving in with Vanessa and Daniel permanently after the wedding. When Vanessa walked down the aisle, she wasn't dripping in the borrowed grandeur of old money and status. She wore a simple ivory dress, her mother's small pearl earrings, the only thing she had left of her, and an expression of quiet, hard-earned peace. Daniel watched her approach, his eyes glistening, remembering the woman who had once hurled a phone across a marble floor without a flicker of remorse, and the woman standing before him now. Flawed, human, but finally, truthfully herself. "I stand here today," Vanessa said during her vows, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Not as the woman I pretended to be for the last 9 years, but as the woman I'm still learning to become. I spent so long believing that worth was measured by status, by wealth, by how far I could run from my own mistakes. I was wrong. I learned that from a woman I once treated terribly. Rosa, who taught me that real strength isn't found in how high you climb, but in how deeply you love the people who depend on you, even when it's hard, even when the world tells you it's not worth it." She turned toward Grace, who beamed up at her from the front row. "And to my daughter, I am so sorry for every day I wasn't there. I promise you, from this day forward, I will spend the rest of my life making up for that. You will never doubt that you are loved again." There wasn't a dry eye among the 60 guests. After the ceremony, as the small reception unfolded beneath string lights in the garden, Rosa found herself standing beside Vanessa near the dessert table, watching Matteo and Grace chase each other across the lawn, laughing freely, already fast friends. "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly, "for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." Rosa smiled, watching the children play. "Everybody carries pain we can't see, Vanessa. Some people let it turn them cruel. Others let it turn them kind. I always believed you had it in you to choose kindness. You just needed someone to remind you who you really were underneath everything else." 6 months later, Vanessa formally adopted Grace, ending the custody battle with an emotional courtroom reunion that even the judge admitted brought her to tears. Camille, unable to accept the changes in her daughter-in-law, distanced herself from the family, a loss Vanessa mourned, but no longer let define her worth. Rosa remained with the Whitfield family, not as a distant employee, but as someone genuinely woven into their lives. Grace's favorite person to bake cookies with, Matteo's honorary older sister figure whenever he visited, and a woman finally treated with the dignity and respect she had always deserved. And every year, on the anniversary of that day the phone shattered on the marble floor, Vanessa sends Rosa a small gift. A reminder, she says, of the day she almost lost herself completely, and the woman whose grace helped her find her way back. Because sometimes, the people we look down on the most are the ones who end up teaching us the most important lessons of our lives. And sometimes, it takes losing everything you thought mattered to finally understand what truly does. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories like this one, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to change. Drop a comment below and let us know. What would you have done in Vanessa's place? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.